Jung was intensely preoccupied with retrieving the spiritual vitality of a primordial experience that would restore the connection of psyche to the living historical past from which it emerged. Such an experience is not merely the product of psychoanalytic theory or the study of ancient texts and mythical motifs, but something that arises from an alien and unknown origin that fundamentally transforms one's being. As Jung would state, the main interest of my work is not concerned with the treatment of neurosis, but rather with the approach to the numinous. But the fact is that the approach to the numinous is the real therapy, and inasmuch as you attain to the numinous experience, you are released from the curse of pathology. Even the very disease takes on a numinous character. Here we can see that Jung's concern is essentially religious, but we need to be careful to understand what Jung means by religion. He writes, "I want to make clear that by the term religion, I do not mean a creed. The term religion designates the attitude peculiar to a consciousness which has been changed by experience of the numinosum." The numinosum, the profound depth of a visionary experience that transports one beyond the conscious personality into the depths of the living reality of psyche and soul. Yet what has all this to do with the historical past and historical knowledge? This brings us to what is arguably one of the central riddles of Liber Novus, the Red Book, the statement that the task is to give birth to the old in a new time. How are we to understand this enigma? In what follows, I don't propose to provide a definitive answer to this question, but to present one attempt at unlocking the riddle. On the evening of November 12, 1913, Jung sat down at his desk, opened his journal, and addressed his soul. Meine Seele, wo bist du? My soul, where are you? But a year and a half prior to this event, these developments were already being prepared in the unconscious. Jung had, among others, the following dream. I dreamt at the time, it was shortly after Christmas 1912, that I was sitting with my children in a marvelous and richly furnished castle apartment, an open, columned hall. We were sitting at a round table whose top was a marvelous dark green stone. Suddenly, a gull or a dove flew in and sprang lightly onto the table. I admonished the children to be quiet, so that they would not scare away the beautiful white bird. Suddenly, this bird turned into a child of 8 years, a small blonde girl, and ran around playing with my children in the marvelous columned colonnades. Then the child suddenly turned into the gull or dove. She said the following to me: "Only in the first hour of the night can I become human, while the male dove is busy with the 12 dead." With these words, the bird flew away, and I awoke. At the risk of attempting to explain the obscure by the more obscure, we can ask the following question. Who was this young girl in the dream that turns into a dove and becomes human, while the male dove is busy with the 12 dead? Of this dream, Jung would later come to state that it was the beginning of a conviction that the unconscious did not consist of inert material, but that there was something living down there. Jung, in his essay The Psychological Aspects of the Chore, would anonymously analyze the dream as a stage in the process of the transformation of the anima, of his soul, a living and autonomous being independent of the conscious personality. In the Black Books, we find Jung speaking to his soul. "You certainly know that you have used this image in my dreams, the image of a little girl, and I found you again only through the soul of a woman." As Shamdasani notes, this dream made Jung decide to embark on a relationship with Tony Wolff. Another feature of the dream that we should attend to is the round table whose top was a marvelous dark green stone, which would put Jung in mind of the tabula smaragdina, the emerald tablet of Hermes Trismegistus. Its circular shape perhaps an indication of the path of individuation, of wholeness. Shamdasani again notes that only later would Jung connect the dream to Hermes and the 12 doves to the 12 days before Christmas. On the 22nd of November 1913, Jung would find himself sitting on the edge of a deep green well. at which point a voice comes which implores him, "Waken the dead." So, who is living down in this well? One attempt at an answer is to say, the dead. And from here, it's almost irresistible to draw some sort of connection between the dead and Hermes, the tradition of Hermetic gnosis that would play such a decisive role in providing Jung with the vocabulary to express the insights and revelations of his descent into the unconscious. So, in drawing this connection, we bring the dead into relation with the tradition of Hermetic gnosis, with a historical past that is, after all, still living. The dead who go on living in the unconscious and which seek to live and complete themselves in the present. Over the course of 25 nights, Jung would petition his soul to speak and reveal herself. On the 25th night, Jung finally crossed the visionary threshold into the world of the imagination. A flood of visions would engulf Jung over the coming years, and while the most intense phase of visionary activity would last until 1918, and less intensely into the 1920s, these visions, as Jung would later come to state, converged upon a goal and could be described as a process of initiation. But we need to be careful here. Jung in the collected works is always speaking in two registers simultaneously. On the one hand, he writes from what he called his number one personality, from the spirit of the times and in the language of science and rational norms. On the other, he's speaking from the number two personality, from the spirit of the depths, from the voice of a primordial and ancient wisdom that emerges from the timeless sphere of the unconscious. It's always a tightrope with Jung. Which voice is speaking? Which voice as readers do we privilege? Maybe we should read this as another riddle, a riddle that we as readers have to solve, not as some intellectual exercise, but as a riddle that reveals a central tension that characterizes our consciousness as such. Unsurprisingly, we are led back to dreams. When Jung was a young man and attempting to decide what direction he would go in with his studies, he was torn between pursuing science on the one hand and the humanities and historical studies on the other. He writes, "Science met, to a very large extent, the needs of number one personality, whereas the human or historical studies provided beneficial instruction for number two. It would be several dreams that would decide the question for him. In one of them, Jung is in a dark wood and finds in a circular pool a round animal, shimmering in opalescent hues and consisting of innumerable little cells or of organs shaped like tentacles. It was a giant radiolorn, measuring about 3 feet across. It aroused in me an intense desire for knowledge." This dream, and the others surrounding it, would lead Jung to pursue empirical science. Only later, as von Franz reports, did Jung realize that the radiolorn also represented what Paracelsus and the alchemists referred to as the lumen natura, the light of nature. Let's pause for a moment. Jung, in attempting to determine what direction to pursue in his studies, was beset by a conflict. His number one gravitated toward science, his number two toward history, religion, and mythology. What we have here is a primordial tension of opposites, articulated in this instance as an opposition between science and religion, or more broadly, between matter and spirit. The significance of the discovery that the radiolorn represented in alchemy the light of nature then becomes clear. For Paracelsus, genuine empirical knowledge, and in particular the knowledge required of a physician to heal, comes not from authority, but from direct experience of the innate spirit of nature that dwells within man and the world. This natural light is both the source of authentic empirical knowledge, the province of number one, and of telepathic and prophetic knowledge, the province of number two. The study of nature through empirical science, at its deepest level, is none other than the study of spirit, and the study of spirit none other than the study of the natural world. As Paracelsus writes, "There is more to be known than the mere flesh, for from this very innate spirit comes that which is visible, the light of nature, which is one's own mentor, dwells in this innate spirit. Authentic empirical knowledge emerges from the innate spirit of nature that dwells within man and the world." Jung's Red Book experiences gave him the key to unlock the initiatory dynamics of the unconscious, the hidden laws of an unseen world that are generative of the visible world of nature. And Jung would go on to use this concept of initiation to describe the main stages of the central goal of analytic psychology, individuation. These stages, however, are not arbitrary, but emerge from the living contents of the unconscious and are expressed in the classical archetypes that are found in the ancient initiation mysteries and in Hermetic philosophy. Ancient initiation mysteries, Hermetic philosophy, these are not lightly chosen terms. Jung was discovering through his own primary experiences, through the empirical study of the psychological material produced by his patients, and through the countless classical texts he pored over, that there are living contents in the psyche that stretch back into the earliest recesses of recorded history, and perhaps even earlier. What I am suggesting is that we need to understand Jung's conception of historical knowledge for our own benefit as a conjunction of rigorous historical analysis on the one hand and a primordial experience that breaks through the bounds of conventional academic knowledge. Discovering the source from which it arises is an initiation. If the unconscious contains the dead of this historical past that are still attempting to live in the present, then awakening the dead is both an existential and an analytical process that requires uniting deep primordial experience and historical study. The two must inform and complement each other. As Jung writes, the exploration of the unconscious has in fact and in truth discovered the age-old timeless way of initiation. The door that Jung opened is precisely the door, so I want to suggest, that was opened through ancient Hermetic initiation. It is a door that, when opened, wakens the dead. What does it mean, though, to discover an ancient tradition seeking to express itself through one's depths? Just try to imagine this. You, a thoroughly modern person, bump up against this inner stream that has been coursing through the psyche for millennia. It is far older, far more ancient than your conscious personality, your beliefs, opinions, and attitudes. What will this torrent do to you? How will it employ you in its service with all your particular gifts, faults, and idiosyncrasies? Clearly, one cannot simply replicate or reenact an ancient tradition. That would simply be a lifeless imitation. Rather, might it seek to create itself anew through the unique characteristics, the very modern characteristics that have articulated your sense of identity and being? Might this be a way in which the old gives birth to itself in the new? A decisive moment occurred for Jung in 1928 when Richard Wilhelm sent him a recently translated Chinese alchemical text, The Secret of the Golden Flower, which took Jung away from his work on Liber Novus and initiated a decades-long study of medieval alchemy. Jung writes, I worked on this book for 16 years, that is Liber Novus. My acquaintance with alchemy in 1930 took me away from it. The beginning of the end came in 1928 when Wilhelm sent me the text of The Golden Flower, an alchemical treatise. There, the contents of this book found their way into actuality, and I could no longer continue working on it. To the superficial observer, it will appear like madness. It would also have developed into one had I not been able to absorb the overpowering force of the original experiences. With the help of alchemy, I could finally arrange them into a whole. The esoteric literature of ancient and medieval alchemy would enable Jung to translate his original experiences into the idiom of analytical psychology. Liber Novus was the occult Rosetta Stone, as Lance Owens puts it, that enabled him to revive the barren conceptual vessel of the word. This would be the hermeneutical project that would occupy Jung for the rest of his life, and an important key to understanding it lies in a seemingly minor event. In the summer of 1914, the visions began to ebb and eventually ceased entirely. Then, in the late summer and autumn of 1915, a new stream of images erupted. On the 14th of September 1915, the figure of Philemon first appears to Jung and announces to him, "Hermes is your daimon." The statement is not further elaborated upon, and it never makes it into the main text of Liber Novus. But on closer examination, its significance turns out to be quite decisive. The Greek word for interpreter or translator is Hermes, and is derived from the god named Hermes. As Peter Kingsley has argued, the Hermetic tradition is itself a tradition of translation. In Corpus Hermeticum 1, Hermes Trismegistus asks Poimandres, the deity who has appeared to him, to learn about the things that are and to understand and know God. In response, Poimandres gives Hermes a vision of the creation of the universe. Kingsley argues that the name Poimandres is a Greek etymology of the Coptic and means the knowledge of Re, or the understanding of Re, an epithet that referred specifically to the seat of the supreme intelligence which masterminded the creation of the universe. That is, Thoth, the Egyptian god of knowledge and wisdom. Poimandres, the god who initiates Hermes Trismegistus, is Thoth. Kingsley asserts that the author of Corpus Hermeticum 1 is making a direct statement that Hermes Trismegistus is the interpreter or translator of the tradition deriving from Thoth. Here, right at the heart of the Hermetic corpus, Kingsley writes, we have a startling reminder of the role of Hermeticism as a tradition of translation. Jung, in his role as hermeneut, could be situated precisely in such a tradition. The experiences recorded in Liber Novus were the basis of his interpretation of Hermetic literature, which provided him with the living, mythopoetic language necessary to revalorize the barren conceptual vessel of the word with a living and experienced fact. Not only that, Jung seems to have understood himself as a link in a golden chain, the Hermetic aurea catena, which has existed from the beginning of philosophical alchemy and Gnosticism. Here, the hermeneutical task is not aimed at mere conceptual understanding, but at an understanding that pierces right into the heart of the visionary imagination, that discloses the contours of the things that are, at gnosis. The knowledge that Jung's invisible guide and teacher Philemon teaches is precisely of this nature, first by way of magic, then later through the direct immediacy of gnosis. Jung's first encounter with Philemon is as a personified figure, old and seemingly feeble-minded. Philemon lives as a pensioned magician who has retired from service in a small house in the country with his wife Bacchus. Jung seeks from Philemon an understanding of magic. In a cupboard, along with a magic rod and the 6th and 7th books of Moses, is none other than the wisdom of Hermes Trismegistus. As Garth Fowden writes, the way of Hermes is the way of immortality. And as Jean-Pierre Mahe puts it in his introduction to the Hermetic tractate, The Discourse on the 8th and the 9th, the experience of immortality consists in divine self-contemplation and manifestation of oneself to oneself. Whoever sees himself by the power of this nous tends to recover his essential self and become assimilated to the self-begotten human. Then he can also see the source of the unbegotten one. But something strange happens in this text once the disciple undergoes this experience. They are instructed by their spiritual teacher, Hermes Trismegistus, to carve the book of his, the initiate's, vision on turquoise steles, and to put it in that is, in Thoth's sanctuary, which Mahe conjectures is the sanctuary of Thoth in ancient Thebes. The stele, so it seems, now carries the experience of immortalization and divinization within it, and is preserved for those advancing in the way of immortality. An essential function of this path, of the Hermetic path, then, is to transmit this experience down through the generations, to preserve it through the course of time. And this brings us back to Jung, to the experience of the numinosum and of the unbounded in this life. Eternity, Jung writes, is the essential thing. The decisive question in life is, are we related to the infinite or not? But Jung wasn't concerned with this experience for its own sake. He strikes more the portrait of an adept of the Hermetic lineage when he writes, "I did not accomplish something new. I preserve the cultural traditions only as much as I can." We thus see that giving birth to the old in a new time is not merely an academic exercise, nor is the experience intended to merely flatter and inflate our egos. In fact, quite often it does precisely the opposite. One only has to read the Red Book to catch a glimpse of the kind of sacrifice such an experience demands. Rather, in encountering the subterranean stream that goes on coursing throughout the ages, our burdens increase. Tasks are laid at our feet that only we will be able to accomplish. In doing so, we become a vehicle or a channel for something far older and more powerful than ourselves. We are initiated. And an initiation is only a beginning. How we carry out the tasks that are given to us will only be known through the sacred contract established between us and our soul. Waken the dead. Return to yourself.